Welcome back to Language of the Soul, conversations on healing and growth. I'm Ben Umstead.
And I'm Martin Perkins.
An interesting book that we were both aware of. I myself had never read Long Emergency by James Howard Kunstler, but my dad has read it. This came up in a conversation we were having recently, and it was really a jumping off point for considering what the long emergency is. It's a very enticing phrase. It really grabs you, right? What is that from your perspective, Martin? What Kunstler's talking about, but more importantly, how we all can look at it in our day-to-day lives.
Right. So exploring as an initial phase, your question of like, what does he mean by the long emergency, and connect it to practices that we as human beings can embody in our lives so that we have tools to deal with this constant state of stress that is the byproduct of what Kunstler calls the long emergency. When he wrote the book, the principal theme was an exploration of the effects of a peak in oil extraction. What would the world look like in the aftermath once we reach what they call peak oil? What will happen to the world once there's not more and more oil to extract from the planet? Over time, the long emergency came to mean something, in essence, far broader, in that it began to be associated with all of the byproducts of climate change. And as climate change unfolded, so did a series of cracks in our political and social systems. And that's what we're seeing now. What we want to discuss today is, Kunstler argued that the economic upheavals caused by peak oil would force Americans to live in more localized, more self-sufficient communities. And while that's a call by many to action, and there is truth that, it kind of comes back to an article I read 20 or so years ago. I believe it was in the New Yorker. And in it, the journalist asked of a climate scientist, they're asked the question, how do we prepare for climate change? And the climate scientist's response is, well, for when? Are you preparing at that point? I think this was 2006 or 7. The question was, are you planning for the 20s, the 2020s, the 2030s, 40s, 50s, 60s? What are you planning for? Because you're going to face an ever deepening state of change from today's perspective. And now here we are in 2024. And the one consistent thing we know about this process is that we're in an ever deepening state of crisis around all that we've taken for granted as modern humans. Whether it be that, we could count on the earth to kind of do its thing, but that, we kind of knew what a weather crisis or a climate crisis looked like. But the magnitude of each of these crises and the unending one after the other has shifted our perspective on it. I was speaking to my daughter Luna a few minutes before we got started today, and she was reading that yesterday was yet another hottest day on Earth. So how do we navigate that? Well, obviously there's personal economic choices that we have to make, but there's also a whole host of other choices that we can make inwardly. And that's in many ways a way to reframe this conversation from one around what can I do outwardly to what can I do inwardly to find ease, maybe even at times peace in the midst of such new states of normal.
These deeper, deeper, deeper changes that you speak of, and the peace that can be found within. How do we go about doing that?
From my perspective, and in the work that I teach in healing and growth, and the words healing and growth from my perspective are deeply steeped in a practice within rest and I've taken rest and I've broken it down into 4 forms or practices. So I'm kind of going to dangle the 4 forms of rest here. I'm going to take a step back from your question, and I'm going to step back into that phrase, long emergency, and ask that we explore those words. What do those words in essence mean? If we look at number 1, what is the root of the word emergency? And what we come up with is mid-17th century, medieval Latin, the word emergentia comes up. And that comes from emergere, which in essence means arise, bring to light. And from there, we see the evolution of, say, the role of the butterfly coming out of its cocoon, right? Emergence. Something emerges, and it means, in essence, to move out of or away from something and come into view. And it also means to recover from or survive a difficult or demanding situation. But the truth is, the difficult or demanding situations we're in, whether it be in our family or personal lives, whether it be in our communities, whether it be in our larger social and political structures, we're in a constant state of emergency, whether it be storms that are at a magnitude now where we really can't easily recover as communities. It then brings us to the definition of emergency, which is a serious, unexpected, or often dangerous situation requiring immediate action. So emergency really arises out of something that has arisen, that has been brought to light, but it happened in such an unexpected and dangerous way that we have to act, because often our very survival is contingent upon that action. And so I would offer, in such a moment as this, where it's a constant state of emergencies, we have to begin to look upon this as existing in such an ongoing state that if we don't create what I call inner stability, we're not going to be able to create any sense of stability in the outer world. And stability, or stable, is defined as a resistance to change, especially sudden change, or a deterioration of something, to be fixed and steady. Now, I do have some issues with the notion that what I'm teaching is about being fixed and steady. But it does, in many ways, mean more about how to be reliable, how to access our inner strength. And that's another way of looking at our stability. So it doesn't have to be something that's fixed. Stability doesn't mean necessarily that we're unchanging. It really means the opposite. It means, how do we adapt to an ever-changing world? That's the kind of stable that I'm speaking of. This is the kind of stability that we become very adaptable. And what I've learned is that if we're not well rested, it's literally impossible to create a stable response to change.
So that stability, that response to change, I've found to be so significant in my day-to-day feeling, knowing the difference in how I physically am as a body based off of sleep, the environment, the stimulation, food, all of these things that can bring about various forms of rest. The 4 forms of rest that you've outlined are really quite empowering. It's not go to sleep, do all this. It's not just based on that. It really has a flexibility and an equilibrium to it. It doesn't eschew the modern world that we live in, the technology that we all are used to using and having. And I think that's really significant when we look at healing and growth work, inner work, personal spiritual work, because often the language used is so esoteric and it pushes away from what our daily lives typically are. And this speaks to the adaptability. How do we show up and rest wherever we are? So can we break down what these 4 forms of rest are that you've outlined in Language of the Soul, A Path of Simplicity?
Absolutely. So whether I'm working with a brand new client, new student, or frankly just speaking with someone about what's going on in their lives, it almost inevitably is revealed that in one way, shape, or form, physically, emotionally, or spiritually, we've become, as a culture, as a whole, fatigued. Well, no kidding. When you're in the midst of the long emergency, of course you're going to be fatigued. And as much as we want to think that technology on any level is going to provide some kind of respite, in practice, it's quite the opposite. Technology has not served as a platform to create a more restful or regenerative relationship. In fact, if anything, the only way to get more restful is by shifting our relationships with the technology around us. And one of those initially is the fact that many people have this very, how should I put it, rote relationship with sleep. And they'll say to me things like, well, I get 7 hours every night. And I'll say to them, does 7 work every night? And the answer is often no. Are there people in the world that can make do with 4 hours of sleep? I would say, sure. They represent this tiny percentage. Are there people in the world that can make do with 7 hours of sleep most nights? And I would say, sure. And they too represent a certain percentage. I'm not here to define that. I'm here to say most of us need more. And so what I say, because we do live in an exhausted society, I encourage people to approach their sleep cycle from the possibility that they could get 9 hours of sleep. Now, do they have to be sleeping that entire time? Of course not. They can be resting. But the fact that they're not doing is what matters. So if you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't get back to sleep, I'm not that concerned about that. All I really want you to do is remain restful. Listen to some music. Whatever you want to do that is restful for you, right? Look at your pre-sleep process. Some people can go right from doing things to sleep in a half an hour. Other people, it takes 2 hours or more. This notion as well, and I was alluding to it earlier, this notion that we need the same amount of sleep every night. Again, it's a false narrative. Some nights we can make do with 6 or 7 hours. Most nights we need more. Either way, all of us need a lot of rest. What humans in this era fail to look at is that in large measure, we're the first really, this last, say, 100 to 150 years of humans, we're the first generation of, or multiple generations of people who believe that you don't need a lot of rest. Prior to this, whether by design or by circumstance, people got a lot more rest, right? There was just less stimuli. As a result, there's a lot of exhausted people. Although that's not really the only source of fatigue, right? The fact that the people aren't getting enough sleep. It's not the source of the fatigue, it's the source of the inability to regenerate. You can't regenerate if you're not getting enough rest, and sleep is crucial to that, but it's not exclusive to that.
What else is there when we're considering that fatigue? You talk about the overstimulation. I think that's something that will ring out like a clarion bell to anyone listening to this. There will be unique forms of that for each of us, but there are things that are rampant in our industrialized society that is overstimulating.
Right, which leads us to the second form, which is each day to practice not doing.
Not doing? What do you mean?
Not doing. You're not plugged into something you feel you need to do. It could be work-related. It could be related to just the tasks at hand. The house needs to be clean. This, that, or the other has to be done. All the tasks that the culture says we must do each day in order to be okay, right?
Keeping up appearances.
Keeping up appearances. And those appearances aren't always external. Sometimes I have to teach people how to be okay with things not being, for instance, immaculately clean, right? That good enough is just that. So each day, from the point of view of practicing not doing, is allowing yourself a period or periods of time where you do nothing. I have no attachment to what you do with that time. You could read. You could watch TV. You could take a walk in the neighborhood. You could go sit on the porch. In essence, you're letting go of the anxious, worried, and frustrated thoughts of the day, the things that are draining you. And when you notice that you're still there with them, practice letting them go. And I encourage everyone to have some period of an hour or 2 hours every day where they do nothing.
Now, what about all of these periods of work, the way most people's work schedules are structured, where there is this rampant, gotta do it, gotta do it, gotta do it, gotta do it. I've talked to people, I've talked to my partner, I've talked to friends where they have so many things that they are doing, tasks that they've been assigned that day, that they don't even get up and go to the bathroom. They feel like they have to complete it. How do we address this kind of overstimulation?
By taking many short breaks each day. In many ways, from a kind of studied perspective, almost every work study done encourages hourly or every other hour breaks. That in doing so, through this course of an average work day, you're going to be that much more effective. So what I'm in essence saying is what every efficiency expert is already saying, which is take 5 to 10 minutes. And if you can't because your work doesn't permit that, go to the bathroom. Go sit on the toilet and take some breaths. Do a reset. Don't allow anything within the workspace to prevent you from taking, even if it's just 3 minutes, or into another room, into a break room, and just stretch your body a little bit. Allow yourself these resets. And the result is that the work of the day doesn't exhaust you, so that by 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you're not completely whacked. And I say, even if you have a workspace where it allows you to, I say take a nap. Take a 10, 15-minute nap. Just if you're working from home, just walk in, set an alarm for 15 minutes, and just close your eyes. It's not so much that the expectation is that you're going to instantly be rested at the end of the 15 minutes. It's that you've created or are in the process of creating a reset. And that if you keep doing this every day, the body, the mind, the spirit, it responds. And though it's the last of them, the fourth form, I want to immediately segue into that without much of an intro, because it's the one that, frankly, the other forms of rest are all built upon, which is the willingness to rest your mind. Now, I teach energy-based meditation. In other words, it's a form of meditation that predates Qigong. It's called Dao Yin. And Dao Yin is not a movement-based energy meditation, but a sitting form. Frankly, you can sit, you can lay down. It doesn't matter what your body position is. You can stand. The key is you learn how to quiet the mind so that these other forms of rest can actually occur more effectively. That you have tools that when you are watching the TV and you hear yourself planning for the next day, you can breathe and let it go. And it's crucial. That said, what I teach in the form of Dao Yin, one need not do that specific form, though I think it's an excellent form of meditation. Any form of breath-based meditation will work. Now, I will say that I discern between meditation and creative visualization.
Guided meditation, you mean?
Creative meditation, guided meditation. The challenge with guided meditation is it's, in essence, just wanting to replace one thought with another. And it's all well and good that you've taken, say, a negative thought pattern, you've replaced it with a positive thought pattern, but you're still occupied in thought. And the goal of meditation is to quiet the mind so that the underlying wisdom that speaks at a whisper can begin to guide you.
I personally find it to be really nurturing. It's really sacred. Doing it for 15 or 20 minutes, sometimes even multiple times a day, is really empowering. And initially, when I talk to people about what I do, they get nervous when I'm describing something that I'm finding to be peaceful, full of ease, not necessarily thoughtless, but as we often talk about, breath sweeping the mind. Those thoughts just moving away like a cloud. They still feel nervous. So how do we approach a multi-daily practice when there's that angst?
You first begin by letting go of the notion that you're going to be good at it. You're going to be a beginner. And it's going to take not days, not weeks, in all likelihood months of daily practice. That's number one. Number two, that response you just described is really the byproduct of the status quo. It's the ego's desire in the face of such a moment to defend itself. So that anxious, worried, often frustrated response to the notion of meditation is often the byproduct of someone having dabbled. And I don't mean disrespect in using that word dabble. If you haven't done it every day for several months, you really don't know what meditation can offer you. And in any other realm of our lives, if I had said to you, what do you mean, Ben, that you didn't learn this computer language in a day? What do you mean? How come you don't know it in a single day? Or after a few sporadic practices with whatever computer language you're trying to learn? Why don't you know that? No one would expect you, Ben Umstead, to know this language. And yet, in many ways, what we're talking about is a new language. It's a new language in that you're learning how to connect with yourself in a completely different way. And no one learns French in a day. No one learns Chinese in a day. Why do we expect ourselves to learn how to do meditation in a kind of instantaneous state? And part of it is, in segueing yet again, part of it's born of this belief that in many ways, we as human beings cannot create wholeness within ourselves. That in many ways, wholeness in the face of the world that we see out there, that's by most people's measure is in some state of brokenness. How can we be whole? And for most people, then the notion of going into meditation and feeling a sense of ease or even peace in the midst of such unrest around us is not a possibility. And from my perspective, when I, for instance, using the word wholeness, I mean something very, very different. And this definition of wholeness isn't really about creating wholeness. It isn't about constructing wholeness. It's in many ways getting out of our own way so we can experience whatever state of wholeness there is. And the wholeness comes in large measure from acceptance, from letting go into what is. If we let go into whoever we are in that moment, and we can find some ease in our imperfections, that's a state of wholeness. We're letting ourselves let go into what appears initially to be a conundrum. How is it possible to create wholeness when, by our external definition, there's missing pieces?
I don't have this in my life. I don't have that. I need to find this. I need to seek this.
Exactly. I don't have all the pieces, but I will be whole once I have all these pieces, right? And I'm, in essence, saying to you, there can be ease with or without the pieces. And within that ease, there's wholeness. I can be whole just as I am. To know that I can allow the picture, in whatever state of completion it might have, it might express itself, that can be whole. To let go of the notion that whatever wound I'm carrying around with me must be resolved in order for me to feel whole. That I have to resolve whatever conflict in order for the pain to end. But instead to realize that we're whole in all these states of being. We don't have to add more ingredients. There's no missing ingredient. It's all already so. If we give ourselves permission to be in many ways okay with the moment, that in many ways is wholeness at its most essential. And as a result, with practice, to be whole no matter the state of affairs of one's life. And in that way, we create an extraordinary opportunity within ourselves that I define as the unfolding, to allow life to be however it is, and realize that there can be ease, there can be peace, there can even be joy. And from that place, we've created enough space for life to unfold in all the ways that it needs to. And in many ways, I would offer what I'm describing to you is really, and has always been, at the very center of what most people believe to be magic. That the notion of magic, it's often based in this very external, illusory form. And then it was this, its earliest forms was in this notion of alchemy. How can I transform a stone into gold? But what if at the very essence of it, I can transform the moment without having had anything change around me? And yet I can see the moment through an entirely different lens. That to me is at the essence of magic. And that is in essence what rests at the core of unfolding life in such a way that we let go of the idea that the world must change so that we can be okay. Because in the midst of this long emergency, it's not going to happen. We can, though, find our calling, not our ambition. Not that I have an aversion to the notion at its purest sense of ambition, but rather digging deeper, digging into what am I really called to do in my life, and allowing that to unfold regardless of what's going on around me. And in that way, coming full circle, we find a sense of restfulness, a sense of regeneration, a sense of access to the very resources that we need to deal with the long emergency within us.
Within us. It's that shedding that light, something emerging. What's emerging? What's unfolding? You are, I am, each of us as ourselves. That's the wholeness that you speak of.
And that's the opportunity that's put before us with the long emergency.
So in a way, there's a gift to that. Why I use that word, it's not to negate the problems of climate change, of migration, of political upheaval and unrest and dissonance. To look at it through the lens of how we change, we need to embody our gifts as people. We can continue, to live creatively through conflicts, through these challenges, how we unfold with it. So the unfolding is a topic that we're going to explore in more detail moving ahead in the podcast. For now, if you'd like to get more of Language of the Soul, you can do so by going over to martinperkins.com, checking out the course itself, checking out the paperback, and now there's even the audio book. You can purchase that directly from Martin. It's also available on Audible, audiobooks, and other digital platforms. Martin, thank you so much for your time today.
My offering is frankly very simple. Give yourselves the love needed to live a more restful life and allow the four forms of rest to have its way with you.